It's 5 p.m. live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll get you the top stories from India and the region. I'm Anil Thomas. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, what are the stories that we are tracking today?
Hi Anil, it's 11:30 a.m. here in London, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe, and coming up in the next 30 minutes, Pakistan's new Prime Minister, France's abortion rights, and Greek defence. First, the headlines.
Shehbaz Sharif takes oath as Pakistan's 24th Prime Minister for his second term. In a global first, France set to make abortion a constitutional right, garners overwhelming public support. And US Vice President Kamala Harris calls for immediate ceasefire in Gaza. UN warns of famine as Washington rushes food rush. Well, Pakistan's Shehbaz Sharif took the oath on Monday to officially become the Prime Minister for a second time, nearly 4 weeks after an uncertain national election that caused delays in the formation of a coalition government. Sharif officially took up office at a swearing-in ceremony at the President's office in the capital, Islamabad, a day after Parliament elected him Prime Minister, despite protests from lawmakers aligned with jailed former Premier Imran Khan. The ceremony, broadcast live on state TV and attended by civil, military, bureaucracy and other dignitaries. Shehbaz was the consensus candidate of the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz and the Pakistan People's Party, and he received 201 votes, 32 more than what was required to become the leader of the House in the 336-member parliament. The new government will have to immediately start talks with the IMF as the current IMF agreement expires in April. Sharif and his party will also have to deal with growing discontent over deepening poverty. But for more on the story, Jessica Taneja joining us from Delhi. Jessica, what are the challenges that await Shehbaz Sharif in his second term?
Well, at this point, the biggest challenge in front of Shehbaz Sharif would be to put the economy back on track. And Pakistan, as you know, has been seeing quite an economic downturn from a very long time, even when his government was a caretaker government in the past before the elections were held. But primarily, Shehbaz Sharif would look to stabilize internal politics because this election mandate hasn't given a clear majority to any of the parties. Now, Shehbaz Sharif, along with the coalition of 6 other parties, Anil, it would certainly create a hurdle to pass on legislation and also a lot of reforms that are required at this point, especially when the PTI-backed members of National Assembly, which are 92 in number at this point, demand an immediate release of Imran Khan along with his wife Bushra Bibi, Shah Mahmood Qureshi and other PTI leaders who were jailed before the elections were held in Pakistan. At this point, with the political agitation by the opposition still continuing, things will not be smooth for the Shehbaz Sharif government, who have a lot on their plate at this point to make sure that Pakistan is back into functioning as a democratic nation, perhaps with more political and economic stability. And as you pointed out, currently, if you look at the statistics, Pakistan does not paint a very good picture. The Pakistani rupee is more than 300 rupees pegged against the dollar, Pakistani rupees against the dollar, and 30% year-on-year inflation. More than that, the IMF bailout package, as you mentioned, expires next month. So, of course, political stability is important to seek or to negotiate for further financial aid. And with the current situation and the political turmoil at display in Pakistan's National Assembly, it looks like the task ahead will be difficult.
Jessica, do you see the possibility of a constructive move by the new coalition government? Should India wait and watch?
Well, India has kept its position quite clear from the very beginning. It has stressed on Pakistan to curb terrorist activities emanating from its soil. It has raised the issue time and again at the UN as well, while Kashmir has been insistent on resolving the Kashmir issue, which India is perhaps in a situation where it says that Kashmir unilaterally belongs to India, and with that context in place, the relations between the two have not worked well in the past. But Shehbaz Sharif, if you recall, when he became the caretaker prime minister in 2022, he had said or mentioned briefly that they would want to normalize ties with their neighbors, India, at this point. But further talks on that were still awaited, while the response from the Indian side has been no negotiations, no talks can go ahead until and unless Pakistan commits to controlling or curbing the menace of terrorism, and especially its other policies that allow terrorist activities to wreak havoc in Kashmir as well all round the year. So once those issues are resolved, I think the New Delhi is not just going to wait and watch, but perhaps see the developments and how Shehbaz Sharif is able to take on the mammoth task of putting its economy back on track and making sure, like other nations whose economies had tumbled in the past, take lessons and push for reforms and better fiscal policies.
Well, tough measures ahead there for the Shehbaz Sharif government. Thank you. Appreciate your joining us on DD India Global. In neighboring Nepal, the ruling coalition between the Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist Centre and Nepali Congress has collapsed, paving way for a new government alliance under Prime Minister Pushpakumar Dahal or Prachanda. A change in the composition of Nepal's government is taking place, with the Prime Minister reshuffling his cabinet. Prime Minister Prachanda will induct new ministers from the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist, Rashtriya Swatantrata Party and Janta Samajwadi Party, Nepal. On Monday, the newly elected 19 members of the National Assembly have taken oath of office and secrecy. The Assembly Vice Chairperson, Urmila Aryal, administered the oath to them amid a ceremony the Federal Parliament Secretariat has organized at the Parliament building at local Bhaneshwar. On the occasion, Vice Chair Aryal presented the National Assembly insignia to the new members, while the Secretariat employees handed them study materials. Elections were held for the 19 Assembly member post on 25th of Jan. Deputy Prime Minister and Home Minister Narayan Kaji Shrestha was also present on the occasion. Well, the French Senate has approved a bill to make abortion a constitutional right. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London and gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, this is a global first when one may see what's happening with France. How do you see this trend? Do you see this trend having a larger picture across Europe?
Well, Anil, French lawmakers, as you say, are set to hold that final vote on inscribing abortion into their constitution as a guaranteed freedom. So the eyes of Europe very much on France today on this issue. France's Senate did adopt a bill to enshrine a woman's right to an abortion in the constitution, clearing a key hurdle for the legislation which was promised by President Emmanuel Macron. If the proposition garners 3/5 majority in the special Congress, then France will become the world's first nation to constitutionalize abortion. The move followed a US Supreme Court decision that reversed the ruling recognizing women's constitutional right to abortion there. Well, DD India's Ross Cullen is joining me live now from Paris for more on this. And Ross, first of all, how is today expected to play out? We'll try and get back to Ross if we can in the next few moments, having some difficulties with that connection. Moving on to another story now, and Israel says 277 trucks carrying humanitarian aid have entered Gaza. That's the highest number in one day since the start of the conflict in October last year. Israel's reiterated that its war is with Hamas and not with the people of Gaza, as it continues to facilitate the flow of some aid into the enclave while expanding transfer capacity. DD India's Sarah Coates reports from Tel Aviv.
During this latest round of talks in Cairo. But what we do need to remember here is that there are still these sticking points. One of these is that Israel is demanding a full list of these captives that do remain in the Strip who are alive. And this is something that Hamas has been saying it will not provide until a deal has been done. Now, there is another major sticking point that we've been speaking about for these past few weeks, and this is, of course, the end to the war. Hamas not budging on its position that there must be a ceasefire in place for any deal to proceed. But what we've been hearing day after day from the Israeli establishment, the Prime Minister himself, is that there will be no end to the war. There will be no ceasefire that leaves Hamas in power in the Strip. And, of course, Netanyahu continuing to say that there will be this operation down in that southern city of Rafah, where Israel does believe that a number of senior Hamas members are hiding, potentially surrounded by some of these hostages. But as I said, there is cautious optimism that these talks could achieve something in Cairo. The Israeli delegation is not attending. This is due to the fact that Hamas won't hand over this list of people who are still alive in the Strip.
I think we can go back to Ross Cullen now, who's in Paris for us. And Ross, if you can hear me this time around, explain to us when it comes to what's happening today with regards to this attempt to enshrine women's rights to abortions in the Constitution of France. How's today expected to play out?
We're going to see all 577 MPs, 348 senators getting together at the Palace of Versailles, the former royal palace, the gilded splendour, all of the parliamentarians gathering there. It's a rare occurrence, Ollie. It only happens when you have these major attempts to change the constitution, everybody going by tradition to Versailles without the president, but the Prime Minister will be there, and for the first time ever the Congress will be held and hosted by the Speaker of the Lower House. For the first time ever, a woman holding that position of chairing this Congress. Everybody then will vote, and for the final time. Already all the MPs have voted in the Lower House and they approved it by an overwhelming majority. Already all the senators have voted in the Upper House and they also approved these changes. And for the final decision to be made, you have to vote once more together. You need 3/5 of everybody, so 60% or so of all the total, more than 900 parliamentarians, to vote in favour. And then, if they are able to do that, then it would be up to the President and the Justice Minister to enshrine it into the Constitution.
And Ross, just tell us briefly, despite the fact that this seems to be a measure that has public support, why is there controversy about these reforms nonetheless?
Yeah, it has widespread support, especially after the president got behind it and wanted to see this enshrined into law by this coming Friday, March the 8th, International Women's Day. However, there were some holdouts and they weren't complete majorities in both houses. There were people voting against these changes. In the Senate, some people did feel, particularly the president of the Upper House, felt that the women's right to access abortion services is not under threat. So why would we need to make any changes? The position is strong, it's written into law, it's legal, there's no need to enshrine it into law. But French MPs were saying, well, look what happened in the United States, where access to an abortion was constitutionally protected until it was no longer constitutionally protected. So we need to make these changes. That's why it has widespread support among MPs, senators, and also, as you mentioned, the public.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you. The Vice President of the United States is due to meet with a member of Israel's war cabinet in Washington later to discuss how to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Kamala Harris and Benny Gantz are also expected to talk about the need for a temporary ceasefire. According to Gantz's office, he'll also meet with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Meanwhile, an Israeli newspaper has reported that Israel boycotted Gaza ceasefire talks in Cairo on Sunday after Hamas rejected its demand for a complete list naming hostages that are still alive. DD India's Jagruti Dave reports.
Officials from both sides have confirmed that the meeting is taking place. In a statement, Benny Gantz said that US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as well as a bipartisan group of congressmen and women, would also be attending. A White House official said that Vice President Harris would be expressing her concern for the safety of around 1.5 million Palestinian people seeking refuge in Gaza.
And given the immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire for at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table. This will get the hostages out and get a significant amount of aid in. This would allow us to build something more enduring, to ensure Israel is secure, and to respect the right of the Palestinian people to dignity, freedom, and self-determination.
The White House is coming under increasing pressure to help broker a ceasefire, as well as secure the release of the remaining Israeli hostages captured by Hamas. All of this comes to the backdrop of fragile ongoing truce talks, as well as an airdrop of humanitarian aid over the weekend in Gaza by the Biden administration, while the United Nations is warning that the Palestinian people in Gaza are on the verge of a famine. Jagruti Dave in Washington, reporting for DD India.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is set to discuss Turkey's efforts to deliver humanitarian aid to Gaza with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas during talks this week in Ankara. Abbas will pay a visit to Ankara on Tuesday and meet Erdogan to discuss recent developments in Gaza as well as the situation in the West Bank. US Ambassador Amos Hochstein is scheduled to travel to Beirut on Monday to continue diplomatic efforts aimed at curbing escalation and achieving stability in the region. Iran-backed Hezbollah and Israel have been locked in hostilities for months in parallel to the Gaza conflict. Washington's insisted a ceasefire deal in the Middle East could be close and should be in effect by the start of Ramadan, a week away. The Greek defence minister says he hopes his nation will play a more central role in ensuring the security of the 27-nation European Union bloc. Nikos Dendias says they should be able to defend themselves, adding that the EU could achieve that in cooperation with NATO and other allies. The European Union's Red Sea naval mission was launched last month to guard ships from Houthi attacks.
Greece does not stand alone. We're proud members of the European family, of the European Union. So what we're trying to do is have a homegrown defense industry, Greece and Europe, which could service the needs of the European Union. The European Union has the ability to defend itself. Of course, in close cooperation with NATO, in close cooperation with the United States and our allies overseas, but we have to be able to defend ourselves.
After a purported call recording of German military and armed forces discussing plans to launch strikes on Russian territory, the Kremlin has questioned whether German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is in control of the situation. German Ambassador Graf Lambsdorff was summoned by Russia's foreign ministry after Russian media published the audio recording. In the alleged call, German officers are heard discussing weapons for Ukraine and a potential strike by Kiev on a bridge in Crimea. That's prompted officials to demand an explanation. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban will meet former US President Donald Trump on March the 8th in Florida. The meeting announcement comes amidst Orban's endorsement of Donald Trump's bid to return to the White House at this year's presidential election. The Hungarian Prime Minister has not met Joe Biden since taking office in January 2021. The Hungarian Premier has faced tensions with the administration of Joe Biden concerning the ratification of Sweden's NATO membership. And with that, back to you in the studio in Delhi, Anil.
Thank you, Ollie, for that updates. Well, still to come on DD India Global. Moody raises India's 2024 GDP forecast sharply to 6.8% from 6.1%. Immunity cover taken away from MPs and MLAs taking bribe for vote speech in legislature.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
You're watching DD India Global. I'm Anil Thomas. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said he had no choice but to defend his country's territory in the South China Sea against what he called Chinese aggression. Addressing a Lowy Institute forum on Monday during a visit to Australia, Marcos said that too much emphasis was being placed on the superpower rivalry between the United States and China at the expense of legitimate maritime interests of other countries in the region.
Our independent foreign policy compels us to cooperate with them on matters where our interests align, to respectfully disagree on areas where our views differ, and to push back when our sworn principles, such as our sovereignty, our sovereign rights, and our jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, are questioned or ignored.
Well, South Korea and the United States began their annual spring military drills on Monday with a focus on heading off North Korea's any potential use of nuclear weapons. The 11-day Freedom Shield exercises come as North Korea continues to test various missiles and other weapon systems and develop its nuclear capability. It is the first since Pyongyang scrapped the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Pact in November. The drills will be tough and realistic and based on scenarios that reflect lessons learned from recent wars and conflicts. Staying with South Korea, the government there began steps on Monday to suspend the medical licenses of thousands of striking junior doctors, days after they missed a government-set deadline to end their joint walkouts, which have severely impacted hospital operations. Nearly 9,000 medical interns and residents have been on strike for 2 weeks to protest a government push to sharply increase the number of medical school admissions. Their actions has led to hundreds of cancelled surgeries and other treatments and threatened to burden the country's medical service. Back home, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday inaugurated and dedicated to the nation and laid the foundation stone of multiple developmental projects related to power, rail and road sectors worth more than $6.74 billion in the South Indian city of Adilabad in Telangana state. Addressing the gathering, the Prime Minister reiterated the mantra of nation's development through the development of the states. He said, with a better economy, trust in the country grows and states also benefit from that as they get investment. Moving on, a 7-judge constitutional bench of the Supreme Court of India has ruled that an MP or MLA cannot claim immunity from prosecution on a charge of bribery in connection with the vote or speech in the Parliament or Legislative Assembly. In an unanimous view, the Supreme Court's Constitution bench overruled the 1998 judgment in the P.V. Narasimha Rao case. The court expressed disagreement with its own judgment in the PV Narasimha case, which grants immunity to a legislator for alleged bribery for making a speech or vote in a particular manner in the House that has wide ramifications. The top court held that corruption and bribery by legislators destroyed the functioning of the Indian parliamentary democracy. India-France on Monday held bilateral dialogue on disarmament and non-proliferation in New Delhi. The two sides discussed developments in the field of disarmament and non-proliferation relating to the nuclear, chemical and biological domains, as well as outer space, along with security, conventional weapons, which include artificial intelligence in the military domain and lethal autonomous weapon systems and multilateral export control regimes. Well, it's good news for the Indian economy as global rating agencies Moody's on Monday raised India's GDP growth projections for 2024 from 6.1% to 6.8%. Moody's has attributed this strong growth to the government's capital spending and vigorous manufacturing activity in 2023. India's economy grew 8.4% during the October-December quarter, which surpassed the initial expectation of 6.6%. India's GDP growth is estimated at 7.6% for the year ending March 31st, 2024. A slight dip to 6.4% is expected in 2025. An Indian delegation presented a copy of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita to the Parliament of Sri Lanka as part of the International Gita Mahotsav on Monday. A 100-member delegation led by Gita Man Shri Swami Gyananji, Swami Kurusharananandji, officials of the Kurukshetra Development Board and High Commissioner of India, Santosh Jha, presented a copy of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita to the Speaker of the Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Yabavardhane. Well, let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Norway's king, Harald, landed in Oslo after being discharged from a Malaysian hospital and flew home on a medical evacuation plane post receiving treatment for an infection and receiving a temporary pacemaker. The 87-year-old has been hospitalized while on a private trip in the resort island of Langkawi. Vietnam's capital city, Hanoi, topped other cities to become the most polluted metropolitan area as ranked by the Swiss air control monitoring firm. The thick smog covered Hanoi streets, drastically reducing visibility. The smog was due to cold and damp weather in the area, trapping airborne pollutants close to the surface. Bitcoin rallied to a two-year high, breaking above $65,000 as a wave of money carried it within striking distance of record levels. The price hit a session high of $65,537 early in Europe, having already hit a new two-year high in Asian trading. It was last up 4% at 65,045. British singer Ed Sheeran expressed his deepest gratitude to fans in Jakarta during his 2-hour concert, saying he was thrilled to hold a concert again in Indonesia. The concert, which was held at Jakarta's International Stadium, marked Ed Sheeran's second solo concert in Indonesia. Well, that's all for this edition of DD India Global, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, Instagram. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We're going to be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Anil Thomas. From all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Global.